A homeless veteran inherits a rusty tool barn from the grandfather he barely knew. What he found hidden in the walls would change everything. If you've ever felt like you were at rock bottom, just waiting for one single call to change the entire map of your life, then you know exactly where this story begins. Stick with me through this, and if you believe in second chances, maybe hit that subscribe button. We talk a lot about them here because sometimes they're all we have. The payphone smelled like rust and rain, a metallic tang that stuck to the back of my throat. It was the third one I'd tried that morning. The first had swallowed my last 4 quarters with a dead, hollow click. The second had a receiver cord that was sliced clean through, its colored wires spilling out like cheap confetti. This one worked, for now. I leaned my forehead against the cool, greasy plexiglass, watching the November drizzle turn the city gray. Everything was gray. The pavement, the sky, the faces of people hurrying past, heads down, collars up. For 2 years since my discharge, my world had been shrinking, the colors bleeding out until only the monochrome of survival remained. 2 years of bus station benches that were engineered for discomfort. 2 years of shelter lotteries and the quiet, crushing humiliation of a paper cup. 2 years of watching the flag I'd worn on my uniform flutter on buildings I could never enter. The discipline of the army, the rigid structure of a life where every hour was accounted for, had evaporated the second I stepped back into the civilian world, leaving me in a freefall I still hadn't found the bottom of. The call was my weekly check-in, a parole condition for a crime I didn't even remember committing. It was just part of the system, another hoop to jump through. I dialed the number for my caseworker from memory, the plastic of the receiver cold against my ear. It rang once, twice. I was already composing the voicemail in my head. "Hi, it's Leo. Just checking in. Everything's fine." Everything was never fine, but it was the required password to be left alone for another 7 days. Then, a voice cut through the static. Not the bored sigh of my caseworker, but someone sharp, professional. "Is this Leo Gallagher?" I straightened up, my back going rigid out of pure reflex. It was the kind of voice that expected an answer, a voice that held files and made decisions. "Yes," I said, my own voice raspy. "Who is this?" "My name is Sarah Albright. I'm an attorney from Coldwater, Montana. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks." Montana. The name was like a stone dropped into a deep well, the ripples spreading out into forgotten parts of my memory. My grandfather, Joseph. A man I knew more from a single faded photograph than from actual time spent together. He was a silhouette against a wide sky, a hand resting on a fence post, his face shadowed by a cowboy hat. We'd visited once, when I was 7. I remembered the smell of sawdust and pine, the overwhelming size of the mountains, and a quiet, stern man who showed me how to hold a hammer. My mother, his daughter, had taken me and left after a week. We never went back. She never spoke of him again. After she passed, he was just a name on a legal document, a ghost in another state. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Mr. Gallagher," the lawyer continued, her voice softening with practiced sympathy. "But your grandfather, Joseph Corrigan, passed away 2 months ago." The news didn't hit me like a blow. It was more like a slow settling of dust on an already still surface. It was a loss, but a distant one, like hearing about the death of a historical figure. I felt a flicker of something, a sad, hollow ache for the relationship we never had. But grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. My immediate reality was too loud, too demanding. "I'm sorry to hear that," I managed. It sounded flimsy, inadequate. "He named you as his sole heir," she said, and that's when the world tilted on its axis. Heir. The word didn't fit. It belonged in movies, in books about families with estates and legacies. It didn't belong on a leaky payphone in a city that had chewed me up and forgotten my name. "Heir to what?" I asked, a sliver of cynical humor cutting through my confusion. His debts? No, she said, and there was a pause. I could hear the rustle of papers. He owned a small property, 5 acres just outside of town. There's a structure on it, a barn. He lived in a small apartment in the back of it. The property is paid off. There are, however, significant back taxes owed. About $3,000. $3,000. She might as well have said $3 million. I had $7 and a worn-out bus pass in my pocket. And, she continued, her voice becoming brisk again, all business, there's an offer. An offer? A developer, Apex Holdings, has been trying to acquire the land for some time. It's adjacent to a larger parcel they're planning to develop for a ski resort expansion. They're aware of the tax situation. Their offer is $50,000, as is. They'll cover the back taxes and all legal fees. After my fees are settled, you'd walk away with approximately $45,000. Mr. Gallagher? Are you still there? $45,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. Impossible. It was a spaceship. It was a winning lottery ticket. It was a door out of the gray world and into one with color. It was a new life, served up on a platter over a crackling phone line. It was 4 years of rent. It was a used car that ran. It was a chance to be warm, to be full, to be anonymous in a way that felt like freedom, not erasure. It was the easiest decision I would ever make. Yes, I said, the word catching in my throat. Yes, I'll take it. That's a sensible choice, Ms. Albright said, and I could almost hear her ticking a box on a form. However, there's a condition in the will. It's a bit unorthodox. Your grandfather stipulated that you must travel to the property and retrieve a personal item from the barn before the estate can be settled. A toolbox, specifically. He was very clear on that point. You have to physically take possession of it on the property. A condition, of course. Nothing was ever simple. My first instinct was to argue, to ask if she could just ship it. But the specter of $45,000 silenced me. For that kind of money, I'd walk to Montana. When? I asked. The offer from Apex is contingent on a quick settlement. They've given us 30 days. I've already taken the liberty of purchasing a bus ticket for you. It leaves tomorrow morning. It will be waiting for you at the Greyhound station under your name. It's the best I could do on short notice. She sounded efficient, detached. To her, I was a messy, loose end to be tied up. A name on a file, a complication in a real estate transaction. She had no idea she was handing me an escape hatch from a life I was drowning in. I'll be there, I said. We finalized the details, her voice a stream of logistical information that I barely processed. I hung up the phone, the receiver clicking back into its cradle with a sound of finality. I stood there for a long time, the rain still tapping on the glass. $45,000. A trip to Montana. A toolbox. It felt like a dream, a strange, convoluted fairy tale. But when I pushed the coin return button on the payphone out of sheer habit, a single quarter, shiny and real, tumbled out. I picked it up. It was cold and solid in my palm. It was a start. The journey was a long, vibrating blur. For 2 days and 2 nights, the bus rumbled across the country, a silver capsule moving through the vast, changing landscape of America. I watched cities bleed into suburbs, suburbs into farmland, farmland into the wide, empty plains. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cool glass, the country scrolling past like a film I was only half watching. The other passengers were ghosts, each lost in their own world of headphones and cheap pillows. We shared a transient, anonymous space, our lives brushing up against each other for a few hundred miles before separating forever. I didn't talk to anyone. I had spent so long being invisible that I had forgotten how to be seen. My world was my pack at my feet, the worn-out paperback I'd read 3 times, and the thoughts that endlessly circled in my head. My thoughts kept returning to my grandfather, Joseph Corrigan. The name felt foreign. I tried to summon a clear memory of his face, but all I could conjure was that photograph. The strong set of his jaw, the way his eyes were lost in the shadow of his hat brim. I remembered the feel of his hand, calloused and huge, as it guided mine on the handle of a hammer. I remembered the low rumble of his voice, though I couldn't recall a single word he'd said. He was a myth, a piece of my own history that was written in a language I couldn't read. What kind of man puts a condition like this in his will? A test? A final, posthumous bit of control? Or was it something else? A sentimental gesture from a man who knew he was leaving his only grandson a piece of land he'd never seen and a barn full of junk? The cynic in me, the part that had been sharpened to a fine point by years of disappointment, leaned toward the former. It was a game, a hoop to jump through for the prize money. The toolbox was just the ticket you had to punch. As the bus climbed higher, the landscape began to change dramatically. The flat plains gave way to rolling foothills, then to the sharp, jagged teeth of the Rocky Mountains. Snow appeared in the high crevices, a stark white against the dark gray rock. The air that hissed from the vents of the bus felt thinner, colder. I saw signs for towns with names like Lone Pine and Three Forks. This was his world. A world of immense scale, of brutal winters and wide-open spaces that could either feel like freedom or a crushing loneliness. I wondered which it had been for him. I wondered which it would be for me. Ms. Albright had arranged for a car to meet me at the bus station in Coldwater. I was expecting a taxi, maybe a rideshare. Instead, a dusty, dark green pickup truck was waiting, a man in his 60s leaning against the driver's side door. He had a face that looked like it had been carved from the local timber, all planes and angles, with kind eyes crinkled at the corners. "Leo Gallagher?" he asked, his voice a gravelly drawl. He pushed himself off the truck and extended a hand. "Name's Hank. Sarah Albright asked me to give you a lift out to your granddad's place." His handshake was firm, his palm as rough as my grandfather's. "You knew him?" I asked, climbing into the passenger seat. The cab smelled of coffee and motor oil. "Knew Joe?" "Everyone knew Joe," Hank said, turning the key. The engine rumbled to life. "Helped me build my deck last summer. Stubborn as a mule, that one. But he knew his way around a piece of wood better than anyone I ever met." He put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the main street. Coldwater was a small town, a collection of brick buildings huddled together against the backdrop of the towering mountains. It looked like a postcard from a forgotten era. "Stubborn how?" I asked. Hank chuckled. "That developer, Apex? They've been after his land for 5 years. Started with a polite offer. Then they started raising it. Sent lawyers, sent surveyors. Joe ran them off his property with a rake handle once. Told them the only way they'd get his land was to pry it from his cold, dead hands." He glanced over at me. "Guess they finally got their wish." The words landed heavily in the small cab. Pried from his cold, dead hands. This wasn't just a business transaction for my grandfather. This was a fight. And he had lost. "Heard they made you a pretty penny for it," Hank said, his tone neutral. Not prying, just stating a fact that was probably common knowledge in a town this size. "It's a good deal. Life-changing money. You're doing the smart thing." I just nodded, looking out the window. The smart thing. The sensible choice. Everyone agreed. But a strange, unwelcome feeling began to curdle in my gut. It felt like I was a vulture, circling to pick the bones of a battle I hadn't fought. We drove for another 10 minutes, leaving the town behind and heading up a winding dirt road. The trees grew thicker, tall pines that blocked out the late afternoon sun. Finally, Hank slowed the truck and turned into a gravel driveway marked by a simple, unpainted wooden post. And there it was. The barn was bigger than I expected, a large two-story structure with a gambrel roof. The wood was weathered to a silvery gray, scarred by decades of sun and snow. The red paint was almost entirely gone, clinging on in faint, ghostly patches. One of the big rolling doors sagged on its track, and a few windows on the second floor were boarded up. To the right, a smaller, more modern door was set into the wall, leading to what Hank said was the apartment. It looked neglected, forgotten, but it was also solid. It stood straight and tall against the mountains that loomed behind it, a testament to the man who had built it. It didn't look like junk. It looked like a fortress. "Well, here you are," Hank said, putting the truck in park. He handed me a single, heavy iron key. "This is for the main barn door. Sarah said the key to the apartment is under the third flower pot by the door. She also said to tell you she'll call you on the landline inside tomorrow morning to arrange the paperwork. There's power, and the phone works. Joe kept it all going." He looked from the barn to me, his expression unreadable. "If you need anything, a meal, a ride back to town, you call my number. It's written on the back of the town map on the kitchen table." "Thank you," I said, taking the key. It was heavy, ornate, like something from a medieval castle. "For the ride, for everything." "Don't mention it," he said. Joe was a good man. Quiet, kept to himself, but he was solid. He gave a small nod, put the truck in reverse, and backed down the driveway, leaving me alone in the sudden, immense silence. The only sound was the wind sighing through the pine trees. I stood there for a long moment, the key cold in my hand, looking at the barn. My inheritance, a pile of aging wood, 5 acres of dirt, and a ghost. I took a deep breath. The air was sharp, clean, smelling of pine and cold earth. It was so different from the city's exhaust-choked air. It felt like I was on a different planet. I walked to the small apartment door first. Just as Hank had said, there were 3 terracotta pots, filled with the dead, frozen stalks of last summer's flowers. Under the third one, I found a modern brass key. It turned smoothly in the lock. The apartment was small, just 1 room, but it was clean, meticulously clean. A single bed was made with military precision, the blanket pulled taut, the corners perfectly tucked. A small kitchenette was spotless, the counters wiped clean. On a small wooden table sat an old rotary phone and a folded map of the town. It was a Spartan existence, the room of a man who needed little and wasted nothing. It reminded me of my bunk in the barracks. It felt familiar. I dropped my pack on the floor and walked back outside, my boots crunching on the gravel. Now for the main event. The barn. The source of my future. The place that held the key, literally, to $45,000. The big rolling door was stuck fast, the wood swollen and the track rusted. But the iron key Hank had given me fit the heavy padlock on a smaller, man-sized door set within the larger one. The lock was stiff, and I had to put my shoulder into it, but with a loud, groaning complaint, it turned. The door swung inward into darkness. The smell hit me first. It was a complex symphony of scents: old wood, sawdust, oil, rust, and the faint, dusty smell of time itself. It was the smell I remembered from my childhood visit, a scent so potent it was like a physical presence. I fumbled for a light switch just inside the door, and with a click and a hum, a string of bare bulbs flickered to life, casting a warm, yellow glow over the cavernous space. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't a junk pile, it was a cathedral of craftsmanship. Tools of every shape and size hung in perfect order on the walls. Saws, hammers, chisels, planes, each had its place, silhouetted against the wood like museum artifacts. Along one wall stood massive machines: a table saw, a bandsaw, a drill press, all old, cast-iron beasts, coated in a fine layer of sawdust, but clearly maintained with loving care. Workbenches lined the other walls, their surfaces scarred and stained from decades of projects. Vises were clamped to their edges like iron sentinels. Above, the second-floor hayloft was stacked with lumber, neatly organized by size and type. It was the workshop of a master, a man who didn't just work with wood, but spoke its language. This wasn't the hoard of a hermit. This was the life's work of an artist. I walked slowly through the space, running my hand over the cool metal of a lathe, the smooth, worn handle of a handsaw. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a sacred space. This was his world, and I was here to sell it for parts. The thought soured the air. According to the will, I needed to find a specific toolbox. I scanned the walls, the benches. There were dozens of toolboxes. Small metal ones for wrenches, larger wooden chests for delicate carving tools. Which one was it? I started opening them, one by one. Each was a perfectly organized world unto itself. Sockets arranged in neat rows, screwdrivers nestled in custom-cut foam, chisels sharpened to a razor's edge. This was a man who believed in order, in a place for everything and everything in its place. The same discipline I had learned in the army, he had practiced here, in his own quiet kingdom. I felt a growing sense of unease. Selling this place felt less like a sensible business decision and more like a betrayal, a desecration. But what was the alternative? Stay here? In a barn in the middle of nowhere, with $3,000 in taxes hanging over my head. I was a soldier, not a carpenter. I wouldn't know what to do with any of this. The money was my only logical path forward. I had to find that toolbox and get on with it. I searched for over an hour, my frustration mounting. I checked every shelf, every corner, every cabinet. No single toolbox stood out. They were all just toolboxes. Was this some kind of joke? A wild goose chase designed by a bitter old man to make me work for my inheritance? I was about to give up, to call Ms. Albright and tell her it was impossible, when I stopped in the center of the barn and just looked. I tried to see the space not as an intruder, but as he would have seen it. Where would a man who valued order and precision hide something important? Not in plain sight, but not randomly either. It would be deliberate. My eyes scanned the walls again. Everything was flush, everything was ordered, except for one small section behind the giant bandsaw. There, a patch of the interior wall, made of wide pine boards, looked slightly different. The color was a shade off, the wood newer, less weathered than the surrounding planks. It was subtle. You would never notice it unless you were looking for something that was out of place. My heart started to beat a little faster. I squeezed behind the machine, the cold iron pressing against my back. I ran my fingers along the edges of the boards. One of them, near the floor, felt loose. I pressed on it and it gave slightly. There was no handle, no knob. I took out the small multi-tool I always carried, a relic from my service, and worked the screwdriver tip into the seam. I pried gently. The board resisted, then popped free with a soft snap of old nails. Behind it was a dark, hollow space. It wasn't a toolbox. It was a cavity within the wall itself. My hand was shaking as I reached inside. My fingers brushed against cold, smooth metal. I gripped it and pulled. It was a heavy, military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab. It wasn't what I was expecting. But as I lifted it out and set it on the dusty floor, I saw a small, tarnished brass plaque riveted to the lid. It read, "Leo's Toolbox." I stared at the ammo can, my mind struggling to connect the dots. A toolbox. He'd meant it literally. A box full of tools for me. But why this? Why hide it in the wall? I knelt on the cold concrete floor, my knees popping. The latches were stiff, but they opened with a loud clang that echoed in the silent barn. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was not tools, but a thick, sealed manila envelope. My name was written on it in a strong, slightly slanted hand. Leo. Just my name. Beneath the envelope, the can was filled with things that made no sense. There were bundles of cash, thick stacks of $100 bills bound with simple rubber bands. There was a folded, brittle-looking property deed. There was a set of old, silver dog tags, not mine, but stamped with the name Joseph Corrigan. And at the very bottom, nestled in a bed of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a small, velvet-wrapped object. I picked it up. It was a purple heart medal. My breath hitched. My grandfather had served. I never knew. No one had ever told me. He was from the Vietnam era, I realized, looking at the dates on the dog tags. He had been where I had been. He had seen what I had seen. The knowledge recontextualized everything. The Spartan apartment, the rigid order of the workshop, the quiet, solitary life. It wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a way of managing the world, a way of keeping the chaos at bay, the same way I tried to. I set the medal aside, my fingers trembling slightly, and picked up the thick envelope. My name on the front seemed to pulse in the dim light. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the money, not the land, but this. The explanation. With a deep breath, I broke the seal. Inside were several pages of paper, covered in the same strong handwriting. I unfolded them. "My dear Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you have come home. I hope you have. I have pictured you standing in this barn 1,000 times. I hope the journey was not too hard. There is a lawyer, Ms. Albright. A smart woman, but she sees the world in dollars and cents. She will have told you about the offer from the developers. She will have told you it is a sensible choice. She is not wrong, but she is not right either." $45,000 is a lot of money. To a young man starting out, it must seem like a kingdom. "I want you to have it. That is why I saved it. It's in the box with this letter. It's all the money I have left in the world. Take it. It is yours, with no conditions. Build a life with it." "But the land, Leo." "The land is a different story. The money is a gift. The land is a choice." I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I looked at the bundles of cash in the ammo can. I quickly counted one stack, $10,000. There were 5 stacks, $50,000, not 45. He had saved $50,000 in cash and hidden it here for me. The developer's offer was a ghost, a fiction created to satisfy the legal requirement of the will. Ms. Albright wasn't in on it, she was just the mechanism. My grandfather had orchestrated this whole thing to make sure I came here myself, to make sure I stood in this barn, on this land, before I made a decision. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. "Your mother, my daughter, she left this place because she thought it was a prison. She saw the mountains not as beautiful, but as walls. She wanted a bigger world, and I couldn't blame her. But she took you with her, and in her anger at me, she erased me from your life. It was my greatest regret. I tried to reach out over the years, but she always sent the letters back, unopened. After she passed, I located you in the army. I was so proud, Leo. Prouder than I can ever write on this page. I wanted to contact you, but a soldier on deployment doesn't need letters from a ghost. You had your own battles to fight. I know about those battles. I had them too. The medal in this box is not for bravery. It's for being in the wrong place at the wrong time and surviving. Survival is a messy business. It leaves scars nobody can see. It makes it hard to trust the world, to find your footing in it when you get back. I know this because I lived it. When I came home from the war, I was lost, just like I suspect you might be. This land, this barn, it saved me. Working with my hands, building something real and solid, it was the only therapy that ever worked. It anchored me, It gave me a purpose when I thought I had none. I had to put the letter down again. I looked around the barn, at the testament to that therapy. The perfectly ordered tools, the stacks of lumber waiting to be given shape. This wasn't just a workshop, it was a sanctuary. It was the place a broken soldier had come to put himself back together, piece by piece. Just as I was a broken soldier trying to figure out my next move. The symmetry was overwhelming. I cried then. For the first time in years, I really cried. Not for myself, but for him. For the lonely old man who understood me better than anyone, and who I never got the chance to know. I cried for the years we'd lost. I cried for the letters he wrote that were never delivered. I cried for the quiet, solitary war he had fought right here, in this barn. And I cried because in his final act, he had reached across time and death to offer me the one thing he knew might save me too. A home. After a while, the tears subsided, leaving me feeling hollowed out and strangely calm. I picked up the letter and read the final page. The developers, Apex, they are vultures. They don't see the land, they see a line on a map. They don't see a home, they see an asset to be liquidated. They have been hounding me for years. Their final offer, the one before I got sick, was for $500,000. I have it in writing, in a file in the kitchen desk. I turned them down. I could have taken it. I could have lived out my last days in comfort. But that money would have been gone in a few years, and I would have left you with nothing but cash. Money is a tool, Leo. It can build or it can burn. But land is legacy. It's the only thing they're not making any more of. This place is yours. The deed is in the box. It's in your name, free and clear, except for the property taxes. I paid them for as long as I could, but my pension ran out. The $3,000 is what's owed. You can pay it with the cash I've left you and still have $47,000 to start over. Or you can let the developers have it. You can call Ms. Albright, tell her you accept the phantom offer, and she will arrange the sale for the real price. You would walk away with close to $500,000. Enough money to never have to worry again. Enough to disappear and start a new life anywhere you want. The choice is yours. You can take the money and run. I will not blame you. Or you can stay. You can use the tools in this barn. You can learn the feel of wood in your hands. You can build a life here, on this ground. It will be harder. It will be slower. But it will be yours. Whatever you choose, know that I'm proud of you. You are a Corrigan. We are survivors. Your loving grandfather, Joseph. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. $500,000. The number was so large it was abstract. It was a fantasy. I could walk away from everything. I could buy a house on a beach somewhere. I could travel the world. I could erase the last 2 years of hunger and cold and humiliation. I could be someone else, somewhere else. All I had to do was make a phone call. The sensible choice, the smart thing. Or I could stay. With $47,000, a barn full of tools I didn't know how to use, and a legacy I didn't know if I could live up to. It was the harder path. It was the path of work, of uncertainty. It was the path my grandfather had taken. I sat there on the cold floor for what felt like hours, the silence of the barn pressing in on me. The weight of the choice was immense. It wasn't just about money versus land. It was about who I was going to be. Was I the man who took the easy way out? The man who cashed in his inheritance and ran? Or was I the man who picked up the tools his grandfather had left him and tried to build something? Was I my mother's son who saw the mountains as a prison? Or was I my grandfather's grandson who saw them as an anchor? The old rotary phone on the kitchen table rang at precisely 9 o'clock the next morning. Its shrill, mechanical prrring was a sound from another era, a jarring intrusion into the quiet peace of the mountain. I had been up for hours, watching the sun rise over the jagged peaks, a spectacle of pink and gold that made the city's gray dawns feel like a distant nightmare. I had the ammo can on the table in front of me. The cash was stacked neatly. The letter was next to it. I had read it 3 more times. I let the phone ring a second time, then a third, before picking up the heavy black receiver. Hello? Mr. Gallagher, it's Sarah Albright.
I trust you arrived safely.
Her voice was the same as before, efficient and crisp. I did. The place is something.
Indeed. I'm calling to follow up. Have you located the items specified in the will?
I have, I said, my eyes on the ammo can. The toolbox.
Excellent. Then we can proceed. I have the paperwork from Apex Holdings ready to be countersigned. They are eager to close. As we discussed, they will cover all outstanding taxes and fees. Once you sign, I can wire the funds to an account of your choosing. It's a very clean, very advantageous deal for you, Mr. Gallagher.
There it was. The moment of truth. The forked road. $500,000, waiting behind a single word. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought about the bus station benches. I thought about the gnawing hunger. I thought about the freedom that much money could buy. Then I looked out the small kitchen window at the barn, standing solid and proud against the blue sky. I thought about the smell of sawdust. I thought about the feel of the worn hammer handle in my hand. I thought about the quiet dignity of a man who chose purpose over profit. Mr. Gallagher? She prodded, a hint of impatience in her voice. I'm not selling, I said. The words came out quiet, but they felt as solid as the mountains. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint hiss of the long-distance connection. I don't understand, she finally said, her professional composure cracking for the first time. The offer is for $50,000. It's the best you're going to get. Given the tax delinquency, if you don't sell, the county will eventually seize the property and auction it off. You'll be left with nothing. The offer isn't $50,000, I said calmly. My grandfather showed me their last offer. It was for $500,000. You're a good lawyer, Ms. Albright. You would have done your due diligence. You knew the real value. But you also had a duty to your client's will, which instructed you to present this test. The silence on the other end was now deafening. I had called her bluff. She wasn't a villain. She was just an instrument, a professional caught in an old man's strange, posthumous plan. His instructions were very specific, she said, her voice now tight, defensive. He wanted you to make a choice, unencumbered by the larger number. I know, I said, and I have. I'm keeping the land. There's $50,000 in cash here. I'll be in your office this afternoon with the $3,000 for the back taxes. Please arrange for the payment to be made. But what will you do? She asked, the question slipping out, no longer as a lawyer, but as a curious human being. You have no job, no prospects here. My grandfather left me a barn full of tools, I said, looking at my hands. They were soft, the hands of a man who had been idle for too long. I think I'll learn how to use them. I hung up the phone before she could reply. The click of the receiver felt like a door closing on my old life. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Now I want to pause here for a second, because this was the moment, the hinge. We all have them in our lives, a choice that defines everything that comes after. Maybe it's not $500,000, maybe it's not a piece of land. Maybe it's a choice to leave a bad situation, or to start a new career, or to forgive someone. It's the choice between the easy wrong and the harder right. If you've ever faced a moment like that, And you chose the harder path because you knew, deep down, it was the right one for you. I see you. It takes a kind of courage that doesn't get medals. For everyone who gets it, thank you for being here, for listening to this story. Your support for this channel, for these kinds of stories, means the world. Now let's get back to the barn. That afternoon, I walked the 5 miles into town. The air was cold and clean, and the walk felt good, stretching muscles that had been coiled tight for years. I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't felt since before my deployment. I found Ms. Albright's office in a small brick building on Main Street. She was waiting for me, her expression a mixture of professional stoicism and undisguised curiosity. I handed her an envelope with $300 bills. She counted it, her movements precise, and wrote me a receipt. "The taxes will be paid by the end of the day," she said, her tone formal. "The property is now yours, free and clear of all liens." She handed me a thick folder. "This is the file your grandfather kept. The original deed, his correspondence with Apex, surveys, everything. It's all yours." "Thank you," I said, "for honoring his wishes." A flicker of something crossed her face. "He was a very determined man," she said. "He loved this town. He just didn't want it to turn into another Aspen. He believed some things were more important than money." She looked me straight in the eye. "I hope you prove him right." The first few weeks were the hardest. The $47,000 I had left felt like a fortune, but I knew it had to last. My first purchase was a used truck, an old Ford that looked a lot like Hank's for $5,000. It was a lifeline, my connection to the town and the world beyond my 5 acres. Then I started on the work. I didn't know where to begin. The barn was overwhelming. So I started with the basics, the same way they teach you in the Army. You start by cleaning your weapon. You start by making your bunk. You impose order on your immediate surroundings. I spent a week just cleaning. I swept away years of accumulated sawdust. I washed the grime from the windows, letting the bright mountain light flood the space. I organized the smaller tools, taking inventory, learning their names and functions from old books I bought at the town's only bookstore. I found my grandfather's work clothes, denim shirts and canvas pants, hanging in a closet in the apartment. They were worn and patched, but they fit me, more or less. Putting them on felt strange, like I was putting on a costume. But as I worked, sweating and straining, the clothes started to feel like my own. My hands, soft and pale from years of idleness, quickly became blistered, then calloused. The work was physically exhausting, but mentally it was liberating. Every board I moved, every nail I pulled, was a small victory, a tangible accomplishment in a life that had been filled with abstractions and failures. I was building something, even if it was just a clean workspace. One afternoon, Hank's green truck pulled up the driveway. He got out holding a thermos. "Saw the lights on in here the last few nights," he said, handing it to me. It was hot coffee, strong and black. "Figured you could use this." "Thanks, Hank," I said, taking a grateful sip. It was the best coffee I'd ever tasted. He looked around the barn, at the newly cleaned floors and organized benches. He nodded slowly. "Looks good," he said. "Joe would be pleased. He hated a messy workspace." He walked over to the table saw, running a hand over its cast iron surface. "You know how to use any of this stuff?" "Not really," I admitted, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "I'm learning from books." Hank chuckled. "Books can teach you the theory. They can't teach you the feel. They can't teach you how to listen to the wood." He looked at me. "Come by my place on Saturday. I've got a couple of chairs that need mending. We'll start you on something small." The best way to learn is to do. That Saturday was the beginning of my real education. Hank was a patient teacher, his gruff exterior hiding a deep well of knowledge and a gentle spirit. He taught me how to read the grain of a piece of wood, how to sharpen a chisel until you could shave with it, how to respect the power of the machines. He never talked about the war, and I never talked about my time on the streets. We didn't need to. We communicated through the work, through the shared language of measurement and precision. We were two men who understood that some things are better left unsaid, and that healing can be found in the quiet focus of making something with your hands. I started taking on small jobs around town. A broken fence post here, a sticky door there. People in Coldwater were wary at first. I was an outsider, the ghost of Joe Corrigan's grandson. But Hank vouched for me, and slowly, the calls started coming in. I wasn't just earning money, I was earning a place. I was becoming part of the fabric of the town, one small repair at a time. I used my grandfather's tools, and with each job, I felt a deeper connection to him. I'd pick up a hand plane and see the way the handle was worn smooth in the exact place my own hand fit. I was continuing his work, living his legacy not as a burden, but as a gift. The winter was long and harsh, the snow piling up in deep drifts against the barn. But for the first time in years, I was warm. I had a roof over my head that was my own. I had work to do. I had a purpose. I spent the cold nights reading my grandfather's books on woodworking and architecture, and I started to draw. I started to design. A plan began to form in my mind, a way to honor him and build a future. When spring finally came, melting the snow and turning the mountains green, I broke ground. I used the remaining money and the skills I had learned to begin converting the main part of the barn. I wasn't turning it into a house for myself. I was turning it into two simple, beautiful apartments, using the lumber my grandfather had stored in the loft. My plan was to rent them out to people like me, veterans, people who were lost and needed a quiet place to find their footing, a place to heal. I would call it Corrigan's Landing. It was a slow, arduous process. There were days of frustration when a measurement was off or a piece of wood split. There were days when the loneliness of the place felt immense. But I was never truly alone. My grandfather was there in the tools, in the design of the barn, in the land itself. And the community was there. Hank would show up with his truck and help me raise a heavy beam. The woman who ran the diner would drop off a hot meal. Ms. Albright even stopped by once, not as a lawyer, but just to see the progress, a small, approving smile on her face. I was no longer an outsider. I was home. It took me 2 years. 2 years of hard, relentless work. But finally, it was done. The barn still looked like a barn from the outside, weathered and gray, rooted in the landscape. But inside, where the tools once hung, were 2 warm, bright living spaces, filled with the light that poured through the new windows. The old workshop I moved into a smaller, new structure I built next to the barn, a place for my own tools and my own work. My first tenant was a young woman who had just aged out of the foster care system, with a suitcase and a look of fear and hope in her eyes that I recognized all too well. My second was a Marine, a few years younger than me, who was struggling to adapt to civilian life after 2 tours. I didn't charge them much rent, just enough to cover the taxes and upkeep. Because it was never about the money. It was about continuing the legacy. My grandfather had built a sanctuary for himself. I had expanded it into a sanctuary for others. The inheritance wasn't the land or the barn or the money. It was the purpose. It was the choice to build instead of run, to create instead of consume. It was the understanding that the most valuable things in life are the things we build with our own 2 hands, and the community we build around us. I still live in the small apartment in the back. I still run my small repair business. Life is quiet. It's simple. It's good. Sometimes, when the sun is setting behind the mountains, I'll walk out and just look at the barn. I think about the man who built it, the soldier who came home and found his peace in the grain of a piece of wood. and I feel a profound sense of gratitude. He didn't just leave me a property, he left me a map back to myself. So that's my story. It's a story about how a rusty barn became a home, and how an inheritance of wood and nails became a lesson in what it means to build a life. It taught me that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't buried in the ground, but are hidden in plain sight, in the legacy of hard work and the quiet dignity of a life well lived. Home isn't just a place you own. It's a place you create, a place you defend, a place you share. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever inherited something that wasn't about money but about meaning, a set of values, a trade, a responsibility, I would be honored if you'd share your own experience in the comments below. I read every single one, and I believe our stories are the most valuable things we have. And if you want to be part of a community that believes our past doesn't have to define our future, that we all have the power to pick up the tools we've been given and build something new, please consider subscribing. We're building something here, together. Thank you for listening.